Own the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour, celebrating America. Coming up on this episode,
we have this 10,000-year relationship with the land, and that's only coming out in recent times.
We, the people of the United States of America.
Hey there, welcome to this edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob, the USA 250 Tour. I'm Bob Phillips.
And I'm Kelly Phillips. We promised to visit all 50 states this year in honor of the nation's 250th birthday. Well, this week, we'll be traveling to the territory that became the 49th state in the USA and the 30th state that we have visited.
It is a part of our country, but Alaska is a land all its own. It is not in what we call the lower 48. Its climate is vastly different from most. Its history is very different from most of the other states. And it's huge. All the things we love to find.
Yeah, and one more thing we loved finding in Alaska, a project to teach young indigenous people how their ancestors created meaningful art.
Chak na ayachat, shangukedi na khatsati, kaudli yayi hit, kashishki hit, chet hittach, truchachadi yadi ayachat, achdachanuku ganaktedi.
In English, his name is Ricardo Wuerl. He is the product of a Filipino father and a mother from the Tlingit clan, one of the prominent groups of indigenous people found in Alaska. Ricardo has an interesting and diverse background.
I went to college in New Hampshire, Dartmouth College, and got my degree in anthropology. I grew up around anthropologists. My mom was an anthropologist, and so I got used to having anthropologists come to the house and over for dinner pretty regularly.
And today, not only is Ricardo a degreed anthropologist, he works with an organization called the Sealaska Heritage Institute in the capital of Alaska, Juneau.
I grew up here in Juneau. Grew up here in the 70s, and we were coming out of a period of time where Tlingit culture, Tlingit art, Tlingit language was not well understood, was not necessarily accepted. There were some hard times in our history between Tlingit people and Western society. In fact, my mother is a survivor of the boarding schools where she was taken at 9 years old, relocated to another community north of here, and was not allowed to speak our Tlingit language and practice any of our traditions. When I was a kid, growing up here in the schools, Tlingit culture, Tlingit art wasn't very prevalent, but that has all changed.
You mentioned also that your mother was forced to go to a boarding school. Was that to force cultural assimilation?
Cultural, religious, and it was also to oppress, to remove our traditional practices, our language, our ceremonies. They were viewed by Western and Christian institutions as being uncivilized or paganistic, but they missed the opportunity, and that's where we are now in our history, where the non-native population is learning about the complexity of our cultures.
Ricardo Wuerl says that finally the world has come around to the point where they want to know more about the indigenous people of Alaska. It's a 180-degree shift from the old days and something Ricardo is proud to be a part of.
And it's all about the values shared by the people that have occupied this land for thousands of years. Their social, educational, and cultural endeavors, their language, their art, and the way they feel about the world around them.
So that is exactly our core values. In fact, we have a kutia, we have a totem pole right outside the front door that is called our core cultural values pole, and has 4 main cultural values that we live by here at Sealaska Heritage. We're here on the Sealaska Heritage Arts Campus, and one of the key features that we have monumental art is the core values pole. Now this pole, or kutia, represents the 4 core cultural values of the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people. Now at the very bottom of the pole is a salmon design, and this is a reflection of our core value we call ha'ani, our land. And the Tlingit people believe that everything has a spirit. The water, the trees, rocks, everything that we harvest and eat, they all have a spirit. And under ha'ani, our land, we have responsibilities whenever we harvest salmon or deer or berries or clams. We have to take good care of the land. We have to only take what we need. We share our food with each other. This ensures that sustainability, and this is why Tlingit people have been here for 10,000 years.
The kutia, or totem pole, trail along the waterfront here in Juneau isn't just some sort of roadside attraction for tourists. It's an authentic representation of the clans found in the southeastern part of the state. Art created by master totem pole carvers who were assisted by apprentices who were recruited to make this all possible.
Those apprentices are young people who have been charged with the responsibility of learning, then carrying on what was almost a dying art. Only a few of the masters remain in this society, and without this project, this art could be lost forever.
We're trying to document as much as we can because our elders who have that knowledge are passing quickly. We lost a lot during the pandemic, and a lot of the knowledge left with them, so we're just scrambling to document as much as we can.
To date, they have carved and raised 14 totem poles along Juneau's waterfront, each one based on a particular clan, their crest, their stories. They hope to raise 16 more.
Ricardo Whirl sees this entire project as the beginning of a new era, as a sign to the indigenous younger generation to take up where their ancestors left off, and to find a new way to share this incredible place called Alaska.
I believe it's going to be sort of this passing of the baton. It's like, okay, we've blazed this trail to what is possible, to what our culture can look like while integrating into Western culture, into a community. It's up to you now to show that, as I mentioned, just because we're doing, all of this work with indigenous culture, language, art, doesn't mean we're taking away from anyone. I envision more of the non-native community as they become comfortable, as they become more aware. They're going to see, yeah, that makes sense, or that's a beautiful thing. Let's do more of that.
This is one of my favorite stories we have done so far this year. I know, I pretty much love all of them, but the story behind this one was so rich, and Alaska is so beautiful and different. And we were there in the middle of a snowstorm.
Do you like that?
It was perfect.
Yes, it was. If you haven't been to Alaska, it's a little hard to describe because it's both ancient and modern at the same time. Juneau especially is endearing and a place we want to go back to so we can spend more time.
Yeah, let's continue our conversation, though, with Ricardo Whirl.
When you were growing up, were you aware of where you came from, who your ancestors were, what your clan was? Was that something that was taught to you as a child?
I was, but I was very fortunate that my mother made the effort, despite, like people in her generation, a lot of culture was lost, and the generation before her had been taken away. So it went underground. It wasn't available. It wasn't taught in schools. There were no resources to document or teach our history, our culture, our clans. That was not readily available.
Is it starting to become more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's taught in schools. We have immersion, culture and language schools within the Juneau School District. We have curriculum. We have language scholars. After college, my family and I started a business. It was called Alaska Native Magazine. It was a monthly publication, and this would have been like in about 1982. Back then, it was before we had personal computers and we had word processing, so everything was done by hand. So when we were producing this monthly 4-color magazine in the 80s, it was that type of work. And none of us had any experience in publishing or printing, but our motive was we wanted to report on Alaska Native culture and Alaska Native economies, Alaska Native life in the rural villages, because at that time, in the 80s, it had been 10 years after the passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which was sort of like the settlement between the indigenous people of Alaska and the federal government on who owns which lands. And part of that settlement, we created Native corporations that would hold the title, the deed to ancestral lands. So a new concept for Alaska Native people, because ownership was by tribe or clan membership. But after the land claim settlement, we moved to a Western structure where you had to have a deed and a title. And so they created these corporations, and tribal members became shareholders of these corporations that controlled the lands. These corporations, by law, they were required to make a profit, and the concept of dividends and distributions was also something new. By the 1980s, it had been 10 years after the creation of these native corporations, and there were 12 regional corporations and more than 200 village corporations, because they divided Alaska into like 12 different geographic regions. The corporations, owned the lands, and Native people became shareholders in these corporations. To make a profit, the corporations looked at natural resource development because that was the assets that they held. So there was timber development, mining, some fisheries. We decided with the creation of Alaska Native Magazine that we wanted to tell the story to the rest of Alaska, because it was so new, about economic development, about the progress of these corporations.
And why was that so important?
It was a historic experiment. Most countries, and here in the U.S., the relationship between indigenous peoples and their governments often were, particularly here, we knew in the lower 48, they created reservations and basically said, okay, indigenous people, here's your land, and you're going to live in this little area. In Alaska, with the creation of corporations, we still had all of our villages and we still lived in our ancestral lands. We weren't isolated, so to speak, like reservations. So we had this opportunity for what some would call economic assimilation. There's, cultural, social, religious assimilation, but because of the corporate structure, here was these native-owned businesses venturing into economic development, regular businesses that were Alaskan owned, based in Alaska, at a time where a lot of the big economic development like oil and fisheries, natural resource development was controlled by outside entities. So here's the largest private landowners in the state now looking at what can we do and invest in here in the state. And it's been a long history, just a mixed bag of success and failures. Because the difference, we learned that there were sort of conflicts of values of typical Western-owned corporations where it's strictly profit versus, okay, we want to make a profit, but we also have responsibilities to our tribal members. We have responsibilities about how we use our land and the resources.
As complicated as it is, and as unfair as most of it must seem. Gosh, I hesitate to say this, Ricardo, but it sounds like the indigenous people of Alaska may have somehow gotten a better deal, weren't forced into one of these reservations. You were made a part of the system more. Is that wrong for me to think that, or?
Yeah, though I know our relatives down in Fort Meade would disagree about sort of the pluses and minuses of the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act and the corporations, that structure, because in the very beginning, like I said, it was an experiment. It was, and there were countries all over the planet that were watching how this experiment was going to work with its indigenous people. But to your question, are we better off than stateside tribes that were limited to their reservations and sort of had this separate government, separate life from the rest of the U.S.? There certainly was that, but also they endured a lot more loss of their culture. Most tribes in the lower 48 were removed from their ancestral lands, put into different locations, and sometimes sharing areas that didn't belong to them with other tribes that also didn't originally come from that location.
Right.
It is a bit different under the Alaska land claim settlement with the creation of corporations, and I talked about economic assimilation. There was worry that, we're going to lose our culture because we're going to become shareholders and corporations, profit motive. But what we've learned in the last 50 years since the land claim settlement passed in 1972 is that we have indigenized the corporations. And by that, I mean the native corporations in Alaska do what profit-making corporations wouldn't even think of. One is the corporation invests in social programs in a big way.
What is a totem pole and what is its importance?
So totem poles, or kutia, as in our
Kutia.
language, kutia, they, there's a lot of misunderstandings from the Western world about, when we talked about the interpretation of our culture by the explorers. Early on, there was this belief that, they're worshiping, these totem poles, and there's expressions, you're the low man on the totem pole, coming from that whatever figures on the bottom of the totem pole is like the lowest class. None of that is true. Kutia were created by clans or maybe a village as a way to identify a clan's history, maybe the crests that belong to that clan, or they'll tell a story of that clan. And those totem poles, kutia, were raised in their village or in close proximity to their clan house, as a way to identify travelers coming through our country, and they see a kutia totem pole. So they're coming up to a village and they see, a bear or a killer whale or a beaver crest, and to the Tlingit, they know, okay, that belongs to a particular clan.
Those do have a meaning. If you, for instance, were traveling along and you see a totem pole you haven't seen before, are they able to interpret that and know what it means?
Yes, most people are able to identify crests on a pole. Southeast Alaska is like the equivalent of the size of the state of Pennsylvania. But we have a population of maybe 70, 80,000. These small villages that are less than 2,000 people.
And some of them very remote.
Yes.
Hard to get to.
Yes.
Islands,
Yes.
etc.
Yep, only plane or boat. So the Walter Sobolock building that we're sitting in now, it was completed in 2015 when Sealaska Heritage brought its conceptual plans and architectural renderings to the city. And this was about 2013, 2012, before construction began, and we were just in the concept phase. The city at that time, they looked at this modern interpretation of a clan house. When you look at the outside of the building, you look at the siding, it's cedar, and it had a modern interpretation of a traditional clan house. The city at that time in 2012, 2013 said, well, you know, you are in the historic district. That requires all construction to meet historical standards. And we were like, historical standards? It's like, well, look at the rest of downtown Juneau, the mining era, Art Deco appearance of buildings and construction. And so we said, well, how are you defining historic? Because we've been here for 10,000 years. And so there was that. But at the very beginning, when we wanted to start all of this, the compromise was, rather than changing the definition of historic, the city said, okay, we will cut out this one section, this block out of the historic district so that you can have this modern building in downtown Juneau.
It does reflect, I think, what you wanted to say with this building, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. It is historic. It looks like a clan house, but at the same time, it shows that our people, even though we've been here 10,000 years, we never stayed the same. If we saw new technology, weaving, we absolutely incorporated that. You know, the screen right behind us, it's made of glass. That's not a traditional form of art. It was always cedar or carved, but our artwork is that way where, you know, we can adapt. The concept even just owning land is so foreign to us because I talked about property. We have a concept of property, but it's not the same thing in the Western sense of owning something. So, for example, in my clan, I talked about ownership, property law for names, for songs, for stories, for crests, but also for areas of land that our clan owns collectively. And I have a right to the land that my clan owns, which is north of here, by being born into that clan. Not because of a piece of paper, but because my mother was a Thunderbird. I'm a Thunderbird. The Thunderbird clan owns, you know, this area and has rights to use and occupy it. But when we die, you know, my name, all of my rights goes back to the clan. It doesn't go just to my kids or, you know, to heirs, or I can't sell it. I can't capitalize, commercialize it. It stays with the group. So it's a hard concept because Western values are based on the individual. When you look at our laws, individual rights, you know, are protected. Individual ownership. Success is measured on how much wealth and material you can accumulate for yourself. That foundation versus in a lot of indigenous cultures, our wealth is measured by how much you actually can give away, you share. It doesn't mean we don't accumulate wealth. We redistribute that wealth, food, art goods, valuables to people of the opposite clan, and that raises our stature because we gave away our wealth. That's a really hard concept, you know, for non-native cultures to, because it's the opposite. And we used to train our young men to be warriors. We would send them into the water in wintertime, and they would have to wait for the tide to come in and for the tide to go out, which is very cold. And when they came out of the water, the women would hit their skin with alder branches just as a way to toughen them up psychologically and physically. We don't fight conventional warfare anymore, but we still teach our young people to protect our communities, to stand up for our clans and our culture and our values. So they have become like modern warriors and protectors. So along the waterfront, there is a kutia for the Shungukedi Thunderbird clan, which is my clan. It features 4 elements or 4 crests or 4 designs on there that tell the history and significant stories of the Thunderbird clan. How we got the Thunderbird crest itself. There's a story. There's a white bear on there that tells a story about an encounter of one of our ancestors, a shaman who was crossing a glacier, and they encountered a supernatural being, a white bear, that helped guide our ancestor across the glacier. The Thunderbird kutia or totem pole features a chilkat robe, a blanket that has the image of the sun and 6 human figures below it, that tells the creation story of our clan, about how one of our women married Dagon, the man from the sun, and he lowered his children down to earth. I mentioned I come from the house lowered from the sun, being he lowered 6 of his children down to earth, and we became the Shungukedi clan here on earth. Each kutia along the waterfront here in Juneau is based on a clan, and it shows their crests that belong to them, or a representation of their stories.
I can't imagine there are very many kutia master artists still around. How are you getting this done?
Our president of Sealaska Heritage and our chief of operations met with the Juneau mayor, a city manager, and they were walking along the waterfront, 2020, wearing masks, and and that's when we conveyed the concept of Kutia Dei, where we said we'd like to raise 20 totem poles along the waterfront as a way to, welcome visitors, but also help create sort of this, cultural, educational opportunity and art revitalization opportunity. The mayor liked it so much, she said, 20 poles, well, why not 30? And so we said, well, why not 30? And so when the Mellon Foundation heard this story about how our culture and our art and our language had been oppressed, and how Sealaska Heritage wanted to symbolically raise kutia totem poles along the waterfront as a way to sort of reclaim our place here, in Southeast Alaska, they loved the idea. In fact, they said we were one of the very first applicants for the Monuments Project that got approved, because it fit exactly what they were wanting to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so by raising totem poles along the waterfront, I mentioned we were looking to build 30. They funded 12. We thought, maybe 1 or 2, but they said, you know what, we'll fund 12 totem poles. And we were excited. It says, but you have 12 months to get it done. Oh. That was a heavy lift. As you brought up just the idea, do we have enough artists, master carvers, that can, complete 12 poles in 12 months? As we started doing our research, we also had to find 12 cedar logs, which is no easy thing. And so we had to get started right away, but we also had to identify master carvers. So when we put out the call for the artists, one of the criteria was that you had to have carved 5 totem poles in order to, be considered a master carver. We identified, I think it was like about 9 or 10, but at that time, only 8 of them were available during that 12-month time slot that we were given. So it ended up that, about 2 or 3 of the artists end up doing more than one pole. But they also, we wrote into the grant that each master carver had to have at least 2 apprentices because we, like you said, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to create more artists, which was something that Sealaska Heritage in its operations and its mission and the creation of the arts campus across the street was already doing.
What was the response to that when you put out the call for these apprentices to find them?
They were very excited, about it, yeah, because, one, they get to train someone. 2, they're going to be creating a totem pole that's going to be in a location that's going to be viewed but easily by 1.5-2 million people every year, with the volume of cruise ship passengers that come. And it's also the first time that the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian people were going to have an event, a ceremony, something this large, this significant for our culture. So it was like also a great honor. It was going to give them a lot of publicity and a lot of opportunity.
What does this project mean to the indigenous peoples of Alaska?
The creation of the first 12 poles. When we got this project, we had already erected the core values pole. That was the first one as part of our vision of Kutia Dei to have 20, 30 poles along the waterfront. When we completed this project, there were 12 clans that had kutia, that had poles that were raised. And we had to consolidate it into a single ceremony. So typically when we raise a pole, it's a big event. The clan, gets to tell the story. They bring the pole to life during the ceremony. When they raise it, there's all of these symbolic events, like when you raise a kutia, when you raise a pole, it's like raising our spirits, the voices of our ancestors. And you ask the question, what did people think when the kutia went up? So by this point in 23, when the 12 poles went up along the waterfront, we had already had sort of a flavor of what was in store for making Juneau the Northwest Coast Arts Capital. We had the Walter Soboleff building, we had the Arts Campus, which was focused on indigenous art and revitalizing ancient art practices that were at the risk of being lost. We have a woodworking workshop. We have a metals jewelry workshop. We have a textile room for basketry, weaving, and then a year later, 12 totem pole along the waterfront. And this had really shifted the perception of Juneau as being an art community. It not just indigenous art, but it has inspired. Already, Juneau was known for being sort of like Santa Fe, just one of those places, in the planet where artists, gather and they're supported, performing arts, music, print art, all types of art. And this sort of brought us to another level of supporting arts in general, but now indigenous art. And as a person who grew up here, where our culture and our language and our history in my lifetime in the 70s was not appreciated. In fact, it was kept under wraps and it was not taught. There was, very few classes available where you could even learn how to carve or learn about our history. We are on the other end of the spectrum now, where we continue to grow our programming. We just acquired a building right next door that's dedicated to indigenous science, curriculum, workshops, classes based on sort of our traditional knowledge of how we harvest from the land, how we preserve and how we prepare foods. And I think it's a good beginning for us. I mean, we've come a long way, but it really is, just a beginning for this revitalization of our culture and our history. Juneau I believe, is setting the example that just because there's this indigenous art going up, in our community and language and history being taught in our schools to non-Native children, we are not taking anything away from anyone. In fact, we're adding to it.
And folks in other parts of the country can definitely learn from what they are doing here in Juneau, Alaska, keeping their culture and their heritage alive for generations to come. We absolutely loved every second of our time in Juneau, and we are already making plans to go back. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob, part of the USA 250 Tour. Now, every single week, we're dropping a brand new episode spotlighting one unforgettable story of significance from each state. Now, if you've missed any of our stops along the way, don't worry. You can easily go back, catch up on all of our adventures over on our YouTube channel. And if you want a front row seat to see where our wheels are turning next, make sure to follow us on our Facebook and Instagram page. Now, you can listen to On the Road with Kelly and Bob wherever you get your favorite podcast, or simply download that free Odyssey app. Listen anytime, anywhere.